Welcome to my world history. I'm reading from the book I wrote to teach homeschoolers about world history. A Bible believer looks at world history. You can find it on lulu.com, amazon.com, or at the Bible Baptist bookstore. Excuse me. You can just follow me here too. Now, did you don't have to agree with my conclusions, of course, but you should know about the events and the things that I discuss. That's the goal, is to get you to dig into history too. So now I'm gonna start in starting with the heading of Babylon, but we'll move into some other things too. It's going to take a couple of sessions to do this. So Babylon is the head of the statue that Nebuchadnezzar dreams of in Daniel, a head of gold. It is the ultimate kingdom, the foremost empire that conquers the world both physically, which is always temporary and everlasting, but also spiritually. Several religious ideals and doctrines that have caused so much controversy in later history and so much death have their origin in Babylon. In the Chaldean mysteries, before any instruction could be received, it was required that absolute obedience and submission would be practiced by a type of baptism. Even in Hinduism, early missionaries found out that Indians were familiar with being called twice born, quote, men after a trip to, excuse me, immersion in the sacred Ganges River. The early church, quote, father Tertullian says that, and I quote, in certain sacred rites of the heathen, referring to the worship of Isis and Mithra, the mode of initiation is baptism. The baptism practiced by the pagan religions was a saving act in itself, not merely a sign of a prior belief, a public statement, if you will. It was a pretty tough ordeal, as another early church leader informs us that if they survived the baptism, they were initiated into the mysteries. Tertullian tells us that there was a great reward for submitting to this process, as once baptized or immersed, the person was promised a pardon from all sins, a regeneration. Scandinavian worshippers of Odin, the Norse god that is comparable to Zeus, were known to have practiced baptismal rites, dunking babies into streams and rivers and lakes to wash away their sin. Baptism for the purpose of regenerating a person was found by Cortez when he invaded Mexico. Accounts of this can be found in Prescott's work, History of the Conquest of Mexico, which is one of the most interesting history books ever written. Reading from his book, quote, when everything necessary for the baptism had been made ready, all the relations of the child were assembled, and the midwife, who was the person that performed the rite of baptism, was summoned. At early dawn, they met together in the courtyard of the house. When the sun had risen, the midwife, taking the child in her arms, called for a little earthen vessel of water, while those about her placed the ornaments which had been prepared for baptism in the midst of the court. To perform the rite of baptism, she placed herself with her face toward the west and immediately began to go through certain ceremonies. After this, she sprinkled water on the head of the infant, saying, O my child, take and receive the water of the Lord of the world, which is our life, which is given for the increasing and renewing of our body. It is to wash and purify. I pray that these heavenly drops may enter into your body and dwell there, that they may destroy and remove from you all evil and sin which was given to you before the beginning of the world, since all of this is under its power. She then washed the body of the child with water and spoke in this manner: whensoever thou comest, that are hurtful to this child, leave him and depart from him, for he that now liveth anew and is born anew, now he's purified and cleansed afresh. And our mother, Calcavity Lucu, the goddess of water, bringeth him into the world. Having thus prayed, the midwife took the child in both hands, lifting him toward heaven, said, O Lord, thou seest here thy creature, whom thou hast sent into the world, this place of sorrow, suffering, and patience. Grant him, O Lord, thy gifts and inspiration, for thou art the great God, with thee is the great goddess. Now, how do we get from to Mexico from Babylon? Von Humboldt found in his travels that the Mexicans looked upon Wodan as the founder of their race, just as our own ancestors did. You have to go back to earlier researchers because the purely pagan elements of the Native Mexican people had not yet been buried and fused with Roman Catholic elements as thoroughly as in the last 200 years. Von Humboldt, according to ancient traditions collected by the Bishop Francis Nunez de la Vega, says Humboldt, quote, the Wodan of the Chiapanese of Mexico was grandson of that illustrious old man who, of the time of the great deluge, in which the greater part of the human race perished, was saved on a raft together with his family. Wodan cooperated in the construction of the great edifice which had been undertaken by men to reach the skies. The execution of this rash project was interrupted. Each family received from that time a different language, and a great spirit, Teotl, ordered Wodan to go and people the country of an Anahuac. Comparative mythologists will explain how the concept of baptismal regeneration and the baptizing of infants was held in common by not only the Mexicans, by the Egyptians, the Persians, and the Babylonians who worshiped the Chaldean queen of heaven. There is all kinds of great flood ideas and myths around the world, ideas of baptismal regeneration, things like that. Satan has counterfeited and produced a religion of his own that the world accepted as mankind moved out from Babel and from the center. This is the kind of mess that God takes Abram out of to create a people for himself, to restore the true worship of God. Now, we're going to continue talking about the Chaldean mysteries and baptismal regeneration next. We may have just one more or two things we'll talk about our sessions. But I want to stop for now, give you something to think about and to study and look it up yourself. And comparative mythology is very controversial because in the 1800s, it was all the rage. And it may be some of it's based on racism, some of it's based on inaccurate or incomplete evidence. But these firsthand accounts of people that traveled and studied are very interesting and something to consider. Think about it at least. Consider it. Okay. Thank you.